The Sinking of the Titanic and Other Great Sea Disasters, edited by Logan Marshall. Chapter 7. Left to Their Fate. Coolness and heroism of those left to perish. Suicide of Murdoch. Captain Smith's end. The ship's band plays a noble hymn as the vessel goes down. The general feeling aboard the ship after the boats had left her sides was that she would not survive her wound, but the passengers who remained aboard displayed the utmost heroism. William T. Stead, the famous English journalist, was so little alarmed that he calmly discussed with one of the passengers the probable height of the iceberg after the Titanic had shot into it. Confidence in the ability of the Titanic to remain afloat doubtlessly led many of the passengers to death. The theory that the great ship was unsinkable remained with hundreds who had entrusted themselves to the gigantic hulk, long after the officers knew that the vessel could not survive. The captain and officers behaved with superb gallantry, and there was perfect order and discipline among those who were aboard, even after all hope had been abandoned for the salvation of the ship. Many women went down, steerage women, who were unable to get to the upper decks where the boats were launched. Maids who were overlooked in the confusion, cabin passengers who refused to desert their husbands, or who had reached the decks after the last of the lifeboats was gone and the ship was settling for her final plunge to the bottom of the Atlantic. Narratives of survivors do not bear out the supposition that the final hours upon the vessel's decks were passed in darkness. They say the electric lighting plant held out until the last, and that even as they watched the ship sink from their places in the floating lifeboats, her lights were gleaming in long rows as she plunged under by the head. Just before she sank, some of the refugees say, the ship broke in two abaft the engine room after the bulkhead explosions had occurred. Colonel Astor's death. To Colonel Astor's death, Philip Mock bears this testimony. Many men were hanging on to rafts in the sea. William T. Stead and Colonel Astor were among them. Their feet and hands froze and they had to let go. Both were drowned. The last man among the survivors to speak to Colonel Astor was K. Whiteman, the ship's barber. "I shaved Colonel Astor Sunday afternoon," said Whiteman. "He was a pleasant, affable man, and that awful night when I found myself standing beside him on the passenger deck, helping him to put the women into boats, I spoke to him. 'Where is your life belt?' I asked him. 'I didn't think there would be any need of it,' he said. 'Get one while there is time,' I told him. 'The last boat is gone and we are done for.' 'No,' he said, 'I think there are some lifeboats to be launched, and we may get on one of them.' 'There are no life rafts,' I told him, 'and the ship is going to sink. I am going to jump overboard and take a chance on swimming out and being picked up by one of the boats. Better come along.' 'No, thank you,' he said calmly. 'I think I'll have to stick.' I asked him if he would mind shaking hands with me. He said, 'With pleasure,' gave me a hearty grip, and then I climbed up on the rail and jumped overboard. I was in the water for nearly 4 hours before one of the boats picked me up." Murdoch's last orders were to Quartermaster Moody and a few other petty officers who had taken their places in the rigid discipline of the ship and were lowering the boats. Captain Smith came up to him on the bridge several times and then rushed down again. They spoke to one another only in monosyllables. There were stories that Captain Smith, when he saw the ship actually going down, had committed suicide. There is no basis for such tales. The captain, according to the testimony of those who were near him almost until the last, was admirably cool. He carried a revolver in his hand, ready to use it on anyone who disobeyed orders. "I want every man to act like a man for manhood's sake," he said, "and if they don't, a bullet awaits the coward." With the revolver in his hand, a fact that undoubtedly gave rise to the suicide theory, the captain moved up and down the deck. He gave the order for each lifeboat to make off, and he remained until every boat was gone. Standing on the bridge, he finally called out the order, "Each man save himself." At that moment, all discipline fled. It was the last call of death. If there had been any hope among those on board before, the hope had now fled. The bearded admiral of the White Star Line fleet, with every life-saving device launched from the decks, was returning to the deck to perform the sacred office of going down with his ship, when a wave dashed over the side and tore him from the ladder. The Titanic was sinking rapidly by the head, with the twisting, sidelong motion that was soon to aim her on her course 2 miles down. Murdoch saw the skipper swept out, but did not move. Captain Smith was but one of a multitude of lost at that moment. Murdoch may have known that the last desperate thought of the gray mariner was to get up upon his bridge and die in command. That the old man could not have done this may have had something to do with Murdoch's suicidal inspiration. Of that no man may say or safely guess. The wave that swept the skipper out bore him almost to the thwart of a crowded lifeboat. Hands reached out, but he wrenched himself away, turned, and swam back toward the ship. Some say that he said, "Goodbye, I'm going back to the ship." He disappeared for a moment, then reappeared where a rail was slipping under water. Cool and courageous to the end, loyal to his duty under the most difficult circumstances, he showed himself a noble captain, and he died a noble death. Saw both officers perish. Quartermaster Moody saw all this, watched the skipper scramble aboard onto his submerged deck, and then vanish altogether in a great billow. As Moody's eye lost sight of the skipper in this confusion of waters, it again shifted to the bridge, and just in time to see Murdoch take his life. The man's face was turned toward him, Moody said, and he could not mistake it. There were still many gleaming lights on the ship, flickering out like little groups of vanishing stars, and with the clear starshine on the waters, there was nothing to cloud or break the quartermaster's vision. "I saw Murdoch die by his own hand," said Moody, "saw the flash from his gun, heard the crack that followed the flash, and then saw him plunge over on his face." Others report hearing several pistol shots on the decks below the bridge, but amid the groans and shrieks and cries, shouted orders, and all that vast orchestra of sounds that broke upon the air, they must have been faint periods of punctuation.